This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and today as my special guest we have a wrestler slash referee that many of you will remember if you were a fan of the WWE of the 80s or the early 90s. He was Dangerous Danny Davis, also known as Dr. X. How are you doing today, sir?
All right, great. It was Mr. X.
Mr. X, okay.
Yes, and I'm doing well. How about yourself, Devin?
I'm doing great. Good to be talking to you. Glad you made the time to speak with us. I know you've had a busy day so far, but to start this off, how did you get into wrestling?
Well, when I was younger, I guess about 15, maybe 16 years old, there was a famous arena in Massachusetts, and they called it Witchy's Arena. And every Friday night, no matter where, in them days it was WWWF 3, and they would go there Friday night and have an event. So I went with my sister, who kind of forced me to go. I really didn't have any interest in it, but I went, and those were the days with Baron Cicluna, Jay Strongbow, and the older. Who else was there? Well, older wrestlers, and I went a couple times, and I fell in love. Of course, I was hooked. Any wrestling fan knows once you go to a wrestling event, you will be hooked. So we went back a couple times, and there was a fellow there who was putting the ring up from New Hampshire, and I guess he needed help putting it up and taking it down. So we would help him put it up for free admission to the event. And of course, after the event, most of the people that helped put it up would disappear and not help take it down. But I stuck around, so he took a liking to me and asked me if I would be interested in traveling around New England and helping put the ring up. And I said, sure. There wasn't very much money in it, but again, it was a foot into the wrestling business. And at that time, we had territory was from Bangor, Maine, and went all the way down to Philly. And we didn't go any further south, or of course, you couldn't much further north. And that was our territory. And one thing led to another. After a few years, he was let go. They gave me the responsibility of the ring, and then they made me a referee, and that's how I broke into the business.
Did they kayfabe you much when you first got into it?
Oh yes. It was total kayfabe. I wasn't allowed in the dressing room. I wasn't allowed if I took the jackets back, which was an extra detail. You get maybe $5 or $10 to do that. You left them out. They put a chair outside the door in the middle of the both dressing rooms, so you dropped the jackets there or whatever they were wearing there. But and when you were around, they were very quiet. They wouldn't talk. They'd say hi to you. I mean, they were sociable and stuff like that. But they would always ask you, "Hey, will you go get me a coffee?" Et cetera, et cetera. That's how they found out what kind of person you were. And if you hung around long enough, maybe somebody started to like you, and they start, easing up a little bit.
Did any of the heels scare you back before you were smartened up?
Oh yeah, you were talking about King Kernis, and you were talking about Baron Cicluna, and these guys were huge. They were big men. These were grown over 6 foot tall, 300 pounds. They were intimidating. They wouldn't try and scare you, but they were intimidating. They were big men that were athletes, and it was amazing how they moved around.
How was the pay for being on the ring crew back then compared to a normal job?
Well, if you had a family or weren't able to live on the road, give you an example. We would eat at hospitals because hospital food back then was very inexpensive. You could go into a hospital. We would find ways to to cut corners, and it wasn't very lucrative. Let's put it that way. And that's why not many people wanted to do it, because again, it wasn't something you can make a living at. And that's why I went to the authority, the people above, and said, "Look, I need, if you want me to do this, I can't do this for this amount of money." And that's when I got the ring for myself, and I had my own crew and stuff like that. And of course, you could make a living.
When you started to be a referee, was it learn as you go, and they just threw you in there, or did they teach you before the shows?
No, it was learn as you go. I started in New Haven, Connecticut, my first official match. And it was you got some advice, before you went in. I mean, they didn't train you, but they would say, stay over here, don't be over here, watch for this and watch for that. So that was the amount of training you had. You never went to a school or anything like that for it.
What were the crowds like in those early days when you started working for the company?
See, I was spoiled because it was always a sellout. It was always fully packed. Other companies were, of course, we weren't doing big arenas either. We were doing small arenas. We were doing town halls, and back in those days, there were small places, Lowell Memorial Auditorium for one. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it was a small venue. But they did a lot of them. They did like one a night, or maybe, on a weekend they would do two, especially with Boston Garden or something like that. They would do a matinee, and then they would have a show that evening somewhere in Maine or something, So yeah, there weren't huge arenas, but there were Madison Square Garden, there were Boston Gardens, there were Philadelphia Spectrum, et cetera, and a few more in the area that they did the big shows. But the crowds were always, well, you had Bruno Sammartino there, you had Fuji and Tanaka, you had some of the greats tag matches, Peter Maivia and Tony Gurrier, they had, the rivalry, and the Valiant brothers came in, and you had Jay Strongbow with, on top, and it was so you had some good talent. So I call it talent now, but I didn't call it talent then because I didn't know that that's how they were referred to.
There's a fan on here that's wondering, how is referee pay compared to enhancement talent pay?
Well, it's basically probably on the same pay scale. You did 3 or 4 on TV. You would do 3 or 4 or 5 matches a night for one segment. And they did 2 or 3 segments at a time. So you'd be there from, you'd do maybe 8 or 10 matches for a TV taping. So yeah, it was probably even better than being an enhancement performer.
So you would get your ring crew pay, your referee pay as well, and then when you started wrestling, you might get wrestling pay as Mr. X as well.
Well, that was the key to being in that business at that time. The more things you did, you get paid for it. I mean, it wasn't like a large sum of money, but between everything you did, you would make enough to be able to afford, your apartment and your bills and your lodging and stuff like that. So but you worked for it. You earned I know myself, I would put up chairs. I would put the ring up. I would referee. I would do concessions, and I would take everything down and drive, to the next venue, which is sometimes 200 or 300 miles overnight, and get to the next venue, sleep a little bit, and do the same thing. And but all those things, it was $50 here, $45 here, $15 there, and if you did it every night, the trouble was back then, sometimes you didn't work for 2 weeks, a week, because they were somewhere else. Like we didn't take the ring down to Philly. We only went as far as maybe New Haven, and they had another ring crew from Philadelphia that did the other end of it, and New York and Boston and all that had their own rings. So
I guess Mel Phillips probably had the most infamous ring crew. Did you ever hear any of the inside stories about what was allegedly going on
Well,
with him?
well, I would pass on any comment on Mel Phillips if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem at all. But I never heard any issues with yours, for the record, for anyone wondering watching this. When you were Mr. X, you had a match with Bruno Sammartino. What was he like to fight in the ring?
Well, all right. So I'm glad you know that. I'm glad you brought that up. When you're in this business and you're an enhancement talent, and a man or a performer or an athlete such as Bruno Sammartino uh, requests you to be in the ring with him and with his son. It was a tag match. It was his son and himself and him against me and Steve Lombardi. And to have that man request you meant so much to you, because that meant that you were considered a good, let me say how I say this, a good person to have that to make him look good, make his son look good. So that was the ultimate compliment. So to work with him like that and to be in a ring with him, it was just something that, as you were growing in the business, was something that everybody noticed, and everybody would say to themselves, "Wow, Bruno wants to work with this guy. He must be pretty good." And after that, it indeed happened that other people would want to work with me.
Now, David Sammartino never came close to matching Bruno Sammartino, but of course, not a lot of the second generation stars do. But why do you think he didn't have more success? Because he wasn't a bad talent. Was it just there was so much talent back in those days?
Are you asking me my opinion, or because I don't know the real reason that he never? But my opinion would be that, as with many athletes in many different sports or baseball, and you said it probably the best, that but to follow in a man's footsteps such as Bruno Sammartino is very difficult, even though everybody would do everything they could to help you to be. You're always in the shadow of your father. You're always in the shadow of greatness, and it's sometimes tough on a person to achieve or try to achieve what your father did. So I would, in my opinion, I would say that was probably the reason that he wasn't as successful in the business as he should have been.
And I understand you also had a match as Mr. X against Billy Jack Haynes, who I've done a few interviews with. How was he to work with in the ring and behind the scenes?
Billy Jack, to me, was a great athlete. He was a good guy. He was good to work with. I mean, he was patient. When you're an enhancement talent, you work with so many different personalities, as you say, that you have to adapt to. They have different likes and dislikes. They have things that they don't want you to do, and they don't want you to expect them to do. So what you do is work the best you can and listen to the person you're working with. And Billy, he was as were most of the guys, very patient and never that I know of ever hurt anybody. And he was a good talent. I think they may have missed him, not pushing him as much as he could have been.
Billy told us this story about his backstage altercation with Iron Mike Sharp. Were you working on that show when that happened?
No, I wasn't there. No, I didn't even. In fact, the first I heard for someone to anger Mike Sharp would be, I don't know what would have happened there. But Mike was stiff. Mike Sharp was stiff. I mean, I worked with him as Mr. X many times, and he was stiff. I mean, what they call stiff. I mean, he would lay his punches in, lay his forearms in, and was a little rough. And maybe that was what caused that altercation. I don't know.
Apparently it was. Apparently he was rough, being a little too rough with Billy Jack, and he asked him to lay off, and he didn't lay off, and they took it to the back. Did you witness any of the backstage fights from those days? There was Danny Spivey against Adonis, the Rougeau's thing with the Bulldogs.
Well, I was there for both what you said, not there, but I was working that night or that TV with the Bulldogs and the Rougeaus, but I wasn't there. I didn't witness anything. I was probably either wrestling or getting ready to or in the dressing room. But I guess it happened in the cafeteria or whatever where they were serving the food with the Bulldogs and the Rougeaus, and I was, and the Adonis thing again. It was in Poughkeepsie. I was there in Poughkeepsie as Mr. X at that time, and again, I heard about it, but it was after the fact.
I was just curious, since you were a referee and also helping with the ring, if the office would have kind of expected you to jump in and help separate in cases like that.
No, I've never heard of or experienced myself anything like that, because these guys were. Billy Jack Haynes is a huge man, and Mike Sharp was a huge man in his own right, but he just wasn't as caught up as but he was. No, you don't get in between two trains, and try. I wouldn't think that they would expect anyone to interfere. It usually worked itself out, from what I understand.
There's a fan on here wondering if there was any wrestler's finishing move you didn't want to take.
No.
Because you obviously knew what you were doing and how to take all the moves, and there was none that you considered too dangerous.
Well, that's not it either. No, that's not what I said. I said I would take them. I would trust that when I agreed to take the finishing move, that I would also expect that I'd be taken care of. If you hurt me, I'm out of business, and more than likely, you wouldn't be looked upon favorably, because the enhancement end of the wrestling business at that time was very important. And to hurt someone who's trying to help not only you, but the business to generate heat and money would be frowned upon.
How did they approach you with the idea of the famous heel ref angle that really put you on the map and made you one of the memorable characters from the 80s WWF?
They never said anything to me, Devin. They one day they said that I was, and of course it built up with the referee thing, but again, that wasn't planned either. I always answer that question like this: that I was just getting into being a referee, and I was kind of calling the matches right down the line. If I reprimanded a heel for gouging eyes and the babyface did it, I would reprimand them too. And a lot of referees didn't do that, because the referees always like to be liked by the fans, so they were afraid to do that. And I did that automatically without anybody telling me. And then someone must have caught on and said, "Look, we like that what he's doing." No one ever came to me and said that in that context, but they did come to me and say, "We want you to do it. Keep doing what you're doing." And then they would suggest that I go a step further and DQ the babyface. And one day we did the match with the Bulldogs in Florida, and when it was done, they said, "You are now no longer a referee. We're going to put you in as a wrestler if you're interested in that, to see how it goes." And I took advantage of the opportunity after being there for so many years, and the rest is history. And I'm very proud to say that I was able to do what was expected of me over and above, and it took off. And I was fortunate enough to be, as they say in the wrestling world, in the right place at the right time.
Now, we're based in Canada. We have a lot of Bret Hart fans watching. What was it like working with him and Jim Neidhart?
They took me under their wing. They helped me as much as they could. They were a big part of why Dangerous Danny Davis worked out, because they were willing to. They didn't have to, but they were willing to. Again, Jimmy Hart and Bret and Jim Neidhart all took me under their wing and kind of walked me through some of the rough spots. And Bret Hart speaks for himself. I mean, he's a hell of an athlete. He comes from a wrestling background that is second to none. The way he worked, I mean, again, his career speaks for himself. He was a great athlete. His brother Owen was, in my opinion, as good as or even better. So, and Jim Neidhart, you couldn't meet a better person. And he always told me that no matter what happens in my life, what we have done in this wrestling business is history, and no one can ever take that away from us. And he was right.
And as far as the British Bulldogs, they were known for their ribs and sometimes roughing up the less experienced wrestlers. Did they treat you pretty good?
Yes. There was a match with myself, and it was a tag match, obviously. And Tom, the Dynamite Kid, his name was Tom, asked me if I would stand in the corner on the top rope and let him suplex me off the top rope. And I said yes. And he didn't hurt me at all. I mean, as far as the ribbing and they were, in my opinion, they were notorious for their ribs, and sometimes the ribs weren't funny. Sometimes, and I don't know whether it's because they were British, the way they did their ribs, and sometimes they went too far. But no, I can't say that they weren't bad people. They weren't cruel, but they understood that this was their livelihood. They had family, and if you weren't able to do your job, as it were, as an enhancement person, we call it, then yeah, they would get. And a lot of the stars, the wrestlers would do that. They would reprimand you. I mean, when I came up as Mr. X, you went into a ring with some of the older guys, and I won't mention any names, but if you did something wrong, let's just say you were corrected immediately, and you never did it again. So that's how the business was run back then. Of course, you do that today, and then you probably end up fired, but because there are no real enhancement people. But again, it goes back to what I said earlier. If you hurt someone but they didn't hurt you to take you out of the business. They hurt you to teach you. Sometimes you got a punch in the nose or a stiff arm bar or something like that, and they would say, "Hey, slow down," or "Hey, don't do that again." Or then they would talk to you when you get back to the dressing room, and that's how you learn.
Is that what happened with Outback Jack? Why he didn't last very long? Because I guess the wrestlers just kind of pushed him out.
No, that wasn't it at all. I have said this many times, and I'll say it in reference to this question, that some guys and some people, you could give them all the push that's necessary to try and get them over, as it were. That's how, and they just don't have it. They just don't have the charisma. They don't have the personality. They don't have the psychology. And unfortunately, Vince McMahon is looking for a certain element in those respects. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to make any money, and you're not going to be pushed. And back then, they didn't need to do that because they had more talent and as everyone knows, the talent was just outstanding. And they gave him, they brought him in. He was legitimate from Australia. They did all the promos. They did all the right things for him, and he just didn't, as they used to say, get over. So
there's a fan on here that wants to know if you remember your bloody steel cage match with George Steele in the Meadowlands.
Oh yeah, it's one of my high spots in my career. Yes, that was they call it getting it the hard way. When you worked with Jim Myers, George Steele, things happen. I mean, it was nobody's fault. It enhanced the match, in my opinion. I was working with George Steele. We had an angle, and it was hot, and we sold it out. Went in the cage, and I just took a bad bump into the cage, and so he immediately knew what to do. He let it go for as long as he could, and then he said, that's it. He said, "You all right?" He asked me, sure I was all right. I said, "Yeah, let's, just finish the match." But I remember it. I remember it well, and it's one of the high spots of my career. I enjoyed that match. I enjoyed working with George Steele more than most. George was he was a little snug, as they called it. He liked to be snug, and I didn't mind it because I did too. So, and we had some great matches. And if you remember the doll he had, it was named Mine, M-I-N-E. He would go in the ring and say "Mine" and bring the doll. And half the time in the house shows, I would have a match with the doll. I would flip it and I would drop elbows on it and all that stuff.
Drilling 876 is wondering which building had the loudest crowds.
Madison Square Garden was, built for that. All the big arenas were designed for the optimal noise, whether it be for fan reaction or whatever, or who was ever on stage, the acoustics, as it were. There was one particular place in Worcester, Mass, the Worcester Auditorium, that was phenomenal because in Lowell, Mass, because it was a theater. It was a dome-like theater. It had different levels of chairs and a big stage. It was designed for orchestras and shit and stuff like that. So, yeah, there were some. Those would be the two or the three best ones. Boston Gardens was terrible for noise, but Philadelphia Spectrum was another one that was good for the fan response. And if you look back on a lot of places we didn't do TV more than once, that was and it was a good question. That was basically probably a good reason not to go back to that arena.
There's a fan asking on here about the controversial match where Randy Savage won the title from Tito Santana, where you were the referee.
And
what are your thoughts on being involved in that, and how the whole thing came about?
well, again, it was back then. You did what you were told, and the way it went down is it helped me. I didn't know I was being helped at the time, as I said earlier, that it wasn't something that was in the works to do, but they put me in it specifically for that to happen, because I know it was controversial, and anything controversial, they usually put me in that spot. So I think that again, it was a great night, and I'm sure that they had a rematch, and drew big money, and uh, that's how it went back then.
I know you also wrestled Macho Man at the 1987 King of the Ring. What was he like to work with, and how was he backstage? Because we have mixed stories about how he was backstage.
Well, back then, well, let's go to the Survivor Series first. I was Mr. X at the time, and no one knew who I was, so I was able to be put in a position where I could go out, 2 or 3 times, and finally be the man that Randy Savage beat for the thing. But again, because of the quality of my work, my dedication to the business, and when I stepped in the ring, I always say this to a lot of people, that when you are an enhancement talent and you're trying to work for a goal and achieve a goal to become something or live a dream, and you're told that you're going to work with some of the great wrestlers of all time, Randy Savage being one of them, you go in the ring with him and find that out of respect for you, he made you look good, as well as him making himself look good and counting on you to do the same for him. It's a really great feeling deep down inside, knowing that here you are with one of the greats, working with him, and he's working with you. So if that answers your question, then to that, in that respect, the thing about him outside the ring, he was strictly business. A lot of guys, I never really saw Randy's fooling around or joking around. When he came into an arena, he was business, all business, and obviously it paid off for him, because they made him champion, and he had to follow Hogan and Brett, all, and it was a hell of a spot to be in, be able to draw. So I think the reason for that happening was his work ethic, and he was a professional, and we had many conversations, him and I, about business, and he helped me too in some respects. Let me know that I was doing well, and people respected me, and they respect the fact that I respect them back by doing the best I could.
Your most famous match is, of course, the WrestleMania 3 match where you pinned the Bulldogs for the win. Do you have any specific memories of going out there at the Silverdome?
Yes. It goes back to again, I was, we did the thing with the Bulldogs, and I don't know, it was very shortly after that they said, you're in WrestleMania 3, you'll be with the Hot Foundation in a 6-man tag, and holy crap, I mean, here I am not too long ago, an enhancement talent, and all of a sudden I'm thrown into this this event, and then it turns out to be one of the biggest events in wrestling history. And then it turns out that you're going to get the win at this event. Now, you think back maybe a year or less that you were Mr. X, and here you are at one of the biggest, if not the biggest event in wrestling history. And I'm always asked how I felt about that. And unless you've achieved a life's dream or goal or succeeded in something that you really wanted and worked really, really hard for, which is what we were doing, it's hard for me to explain just how wonderful that feeling is. I mean, there's very few words that can cover that feeling, other than unless you've done it to know what I'm talking about. So that's the way I answer that.
And Crypto Spasm wants to know what your favorite memory of Roddy Piper was, either wrestling or personal. I know you did Piper's Pit.
That was, well, that was exciting in itself. But I think the best one was the coconut with the coconut incident at one of the TVs. If everyone remembers that, I thought that was pretty exciting. I mean, Piper's Pit was great. When he was a heel, he was great. When he was a babyface, he was great. But I think, actually, again, being in the ring with him and doing that Piper's Pit, and I think it was Philadelphia. And, at the end, he gave me a punch and I took the bump and stuff like that. He said, one thing I want to do before I leave Philadelphia. And it was great. It was one of my heroes,
And there's a few people on here asking about Andre the Giant. Do you have any stories about him?
Stories about Andre. Well, just what has been publicly put out there is, he was a big man, obviously a giant of a man, and he had heart of a. He was the kindest, the most gentle person I ever knew in my life. In reality, he was generous. He was funny. Stories of Andre have always been to the negative. Well, not because of his size. But he was so generous. I mean, if you were with him, he would never let you buy anything, dinner or anything else. If you were with him, he would be insulted if you didn't take his charity. He would buy you lunch. He would talk to you one-on-one, as a person. He would never look down on anybody. The only stories I could tell is that, his size he wasn't happy in his body because he was so big. And the only place he was comfortable, and I mean really comfortable, was in the dressing room with the boys, because no one looked at him as being anything else other than one of the boys. And they treated him as such, and he treated them as such. And that's the story I like to tell about Andre.
You also worked with Mr. T back when WWE had him involved in some storylines. What was he like?
Well, I don't know what happened there. Him and I were supposed to, if you look at there's some pictures with him and I are nose to nose and stuff like that. And I was under the impression that him and I were going to have some kind of altercation or a run. The story I got was that he didn't like the traveling every day, the flights, 5 or 6 in the morning, flying, getting into the next town and going to the hotel and then going to the gym and then wrestling at night and not getting much sleep. So that's the story I heard, that They were going to do some things with him, but he just didn't need to or have the need to live the wrestling life the way we were doing it. It was just not in his DNA, as it were, to do that stuff. So I assume that was whether that was true or not. I don't know, but that's the story that was uh, put out there.
Were you working that show in LA the night that him and David Schultz allegedly had a run in?
No, I wasn't there.
There's a fan on here asking, what's your opinion of Jesse Ventura, who I'm sure you had some interaction with over the years?
Well, Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis, again, when I was starting out, in fact, I was starting out as Mr. X. Jesse Ventura was a businessman, and he treated the wrestling business as a business. He was come in, he would do his job, he would be cordial. He was a very intelligent. He was a Navy SEAL. He was big. He was powerful, and I don't mean that strength-wise. I meant in the way he carried himself and made himself clear, and he got along with everybody and worked. His work ethic was great. Everybody loved working with him, and it was. And him and I were very good friends. Very good friends. And I enjoyed being around him.
You were involved in that infamous cage match with Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff. Any memories you can share about that? That was one of the biggest Saturday night main events I can remember.
Well, 11 million. 11 million people I was watched that match. What I remember about it was that it worked out exactly how it was supposed to be. Now, there was a lot of people who thought that this isn't going to work. And that's why they put me out there, because if something should happen or something went wrong where either one of them wasn't ready to jump or jumped too soon or blah, 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 it was going to be too obvious that one hit the ground before the other. Then, the whole thing would be, I'm sure they would have found a way around it, but as it worked out, that's why I was there, because if that happened, then I would just do my thing and say, no, and make it work. You understand what I'm saying? And then it would be more controversy. And of course, the angle would be carried out. But that's why I was there. But to have something like that worked, it worked out. It just, they both dropped almost simultaneously, and it worked out fine. So I guess I really didn't need to be there, but it didn't hurt to have me there as a backup.
As far as Hulk Hogan backstage, I know he was a really busy guy. Did he treat you pretty well overall?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, you could. He came in, he made sure he said hi to everybody and talked with everybody, never looked down on anybody. He was carrying the ball. He was rowing the boat. Who could knock him? And if you were working with him, everybody wanted to be on his card. They were doing 2 or 3 cards a night in different towns, in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world. And but everybody wanted to be on Hogan's card. When you got your sheet at the end of the month telling you where you're going to be and what town, when, where in the town, and stuff like that. If you weren't on Hogan's card, everybody had long faces, because Hogan was going to draw, sell out wherever he went. And of course, if the houses were sold out, the bigger arenas were sold out, you're going to make more money, because there's more money to pay you for. If you weren't on Hogan's card, then you knew you were going to have a mediocre week, good week, but nothing like being on Hogan's card. So he treated everybody with respect, and everybody respected him because, hey, I don't have to say this. He was the hardest thing, going anywhere.
And of course, you were the referee at WrestleMania 4, where you DQ'd Hogan for using the foreign object. Did you get a lot of heat off of that? That's pretty well remembered.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it was what I was supposed to do. I mean, and again, they were probably building this up to for me or whatever they were doing. I never asked, but that's what I was supposed to do. I mean, heat. I had more heat on me than than most guys, and had that were working hard. I mean, there were times I had to be escorted, from the hotel to the arena, and open the door and sneak me in and sneak me out and get me back to the hotel. I'd have to stay at different hotels, and there were phone calls of life threats and and all this stuff. I had a lot of heat, so I really didn't need any more. But I didn't care about that. I just was happy that, again, as I said at the beginning of this, being a part of history that will never be forgotten.
Do you have any tips on being a heel for wrestlers watching this? Because there isn't very many heels that have legitimate heat these days. Actually, there probably isn't any at all.
Well, the thing with heat is and we used to call it cheap heat and real heat. And I had real heat. And the reason for that is you can, if you don't have a television audience, the commentators, of course, today in my day, you had Gina Morella, you had Jesse Ventura, you had Bobby Heenan, some of the greats that could get you over if you couldn't get over. In other words, the match was shit. They would, by the time they were through talking and arguing about it, people would think that it was a great match. And that was their job. Today, there are many guys, like you said, who try to be a heel and do give the finger to the audience and use foul language, and that's not the type of heat you need. Not how to get heat, and no one's willing, in my opinion, no one's willing to do a job for somebody to such an extent that they could really get heat. And without TV, you might as well, you're wasting your time. I mean, the audience that's there you'll get heat with them, and you'll be the heel always in these independent shows. But you're never going to be a Danny Davis or or anything like that, because you don't have the TV or the exposure.
There's some fans on here asking any memories of working with superstar Billy Graham over the years.
Oh, yeah. Jesus, Billy Graham. Wow. I remember I was there when he was champion. Of course, I wasn't. I was probably just, I don't even know if I was refereeing then. But, God, he was a huge, he was big. He was, then he left, of course, and then he came back. He had the cancer, and he came back as the karate or kung fu guy, and he could still work, and he got over. When he was first there, when he was champion, as you know, he was with the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth, who was died too early in his life. He was only in his 50s. But he was a great manager in that in them days, you couldn't talk or you weren't good on a mic and you had this great physique and could work. They put you with a manager, and the manager would use his voice to get you over. And superstar Billy Graham was, again, one of the greats of the time. And he was thought a lot of, obviously. They put the strap on him. They made him champion, and he made a lot of money. But I don't know what happened between the time he was champion and the time he came back. But of course, he got sick, and that could have been attributed to the fact that he left. I don't know.
I think he was very depressed too because he felt he was at his peak when they went with the title on Backlund, which was a decision they had already decided on before they put the title on Graham. And I still don't think he ever got over that to this day.
Well, there's speculation. We can all speculate as to what they were thinking or what they were doing. But I think that, and I was around then when they made Bob Backlund a champion. If you look at where they ran their events, they would run high schools, and they would run in Connecticut. They would run small venues in Connecticut. And Bob would sell them all out, because they were high schools. So if you had 2,000 people in an auditorium every night for 7 nights, okay, you say you had 2,000 people in there, at $25 a ticket, you're making a lot of money. That's almost $1 million a week. When he went into the big arenas, he would do well. He would sell them out, but it was done with such marketing skills that it was kept WWF afloat. And that was Vince Sr.'s idea. And it worked. And Bob Backlund was, a hell of an athlete, as you know. I mean, his background is phenomenal in wrestling. And I didn't know this until later on that, he did well wherever he went. So as far as Billy Graham, I don't know what was in his mind or what was in Vince's mind. I just thought that, in my humble opinion, that the reason they did that is to create revenue real quick in a small venue. It seemed to work.
There's a bunch of fans on here that want to know your opinion of Don Morocco.
Oh, hello. What a nice guy. The Beach Bum. When I first met Don Morocco, again, I think I was we were talking about this earlier, that, there are people who can have the physique, they can have the know-how, the psychology and stuff like that, and not make it. And Don Morocco, to look at him, he was a big man, obviously, but he wasn't cut up like Billy Graham or the other guys, some of the other guys, Hercules Hernandez or something like that. But he could wrestle. He had psychology, knew what to do, and he was a great wrestler. They put the Intercontinental Championship on him, and he did well with that. And he drew money, and that's what counted. And, the Beach Bum thing was fantastic. The Asian Spike and all that stuff. He was a good man outside the ring as well as inside the ring, and that's important.
Now, when they decided to take you off of the wrestling roster and make you just a referee again, did they give any explanation for that? How did they approach you?
This is yes. Well, I'm here to answer questions. What happened was, I wanted to leave, and they needed somebody to go and take around Andre and ride with Andre and make sure that he got to the venues, he got on the airplanes, and he had hotel reservations, and because he couldn't rent cars, I would have, just someone to look out for him. And there was a guy named Tim White who was a referee that did that before me. And they asked me to do that. And I did that that was the reason I stayed on as a referee.
I see. So you were really close to Andre then.
Yeah.
when you became just the referee, I'm sure you did some matches with the Ultimate Warrior. How was he to work with?
Well, his matches were brief, most of them. I did work with him as Mr. X, a couple times. But he was, he was energetic. His energy was so. You didn't have to do anything. You could just stand back in the corner, and he'd do his thing, and have his match. And there was practically no heat. It was just him going over because they knew what they were going to do with him. I was there when the Ultimate Warrior name actually caught on. We were doing interviews, and I was Mr. X or something, and I was doing an interview, and we were in the interview room, and he did an interview, and he said, "I am the Ultimate Warrior." And Vince said, "We're going with that." And from that day forward, he was known as the Ultimate Warrior.
Did you notice a change in his attitude when you were working with him as Mr. X to a few years later when he quickly became the biggest star in the company when Hogan left?
A change how?
Well, we've heard some people say that he wasn't as friendly as Hogan. We've heard some.
Oh, well, now you got to understand, Hogan left, and they put this guy in the position to take Hogan's kind of place. That is a lot of pressure to put on anybody, and I think he dealt with it the best way he could because it's so demanding. I mean, you would get there at 9, he'd have to be there at 7, and do his thing. And he'd do interviews all day, all night, all afternoon. He'd have a special room. He'd have a special thing set up for his interviews. He'd have to be. It was a lot of pressure, and I think he dealt with it in the best way he could.
And finally, when you left the WWE in '95, I think you pretty much got out of the business for a while. You never went to WCW. To my knowledge. What made you say you had enough at that point?
It's in the book. You got to read my book.
Do you want to tell the fans where they can pick your book up?
Yeah, you go to Dangerous Danny Davis, and you follow the link and get the book and I'll send it to you. I'll sign it and send it to you.
Do you have any social media or anything like that?
Yeah, DangerousDannyDavis.com. It's my Facebook page. You can like me on Facebook, and I am always on that with my fans. They talk to me. We tell lies. We we just have a good time. I have over 1,000, people. I just have a good time with them. They're sometimes you get a few that's. But every morning I get up, I got a list of them, and I answer them as best I can. And a little just questions like similar to what you asked. How was it to do this? And how was it WrestleMania 3? And, then they try to get personal where you live and this and that, but most of them are very nice. And I appreciate this one thing I always appreciated that was drilled into me by Chief Jay Strongbow when I first started becoming Dangerous Danny Davis or Mr. X, and he let me know that those people in that audience, most of them work at McDonald's or a car wash or whatever, and they pay hard, good money to come and see you perform. And when you go to that ring, if there's 10 people there or 10,000 people there, you give 110%. And from that day forward, I always took great pleasure and always complimenting the fact that without the fans, the wrestling business would be not as it is today. So to my fans and all the fans out there, thank you very much for all your life. For all the years that you supported me.
And the last question I'll slip in here before we close off, I've had it a few times pop up, is your memories of working with the JYD.
Oh, yes, man. He was a card. He had I've never seen anything quite like that, with a dog chain around his neck, and a junkyard dog. But uh, he was, again. I worked with so many great athletes and great people, and uh, he was funny. He would joke with you without the ribbing, and he was an all around. Everybody would enjoy being around him, and I had opportunities to travel with him and to be with him, and I thought he was a great guy, and I miss him a lot.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Great stories. Everyone, I suggest go to DannyDavis.com, pick up his book. Is there anything you want to leave the fans with to close this off?
Yeah, DangerousDannyDavis.com. You can like me on my Facebook page. And to get the book, you go to Dangerous Danny Davis. And you follow the link and get the book. And again, to all you fans out there, I know it's been a long time, many years, and I appreciate your support. And, take care of each other. And on this day, 9/11, remember all those people that sacrificed for us. And once again, I just want to thank you all for being fans and supporting me.